The bridal suite at the Plaza Hotel cost $40,000 per night. Avery Banks sat alone in it, still wearing her wedding dress, a custom Marchesa gown worth $85,000, staring at the handwritten note her husband of 6 hours had left on the pillow. "I can't do this. I'm sorry, don't wait up." That was it. 12 words. After 2 years of dating, after a $10 million wedding, after standing before God and 400 guests and promising forever. 12 words, and he was gone. Avery read the note 3 times, her face perfectly still. She didn't cry, she didn't scream, she didn't call anyone. Instead, she walked to the window and looked out at the Manhattan skyline, the city Thaddeus Roe claimed to own, the empire he'd built on secrets and lies. She thought about the life she'd imagined, the life she'd almost let herself want. And then she thought about everything she knew. The offshore accounts in the Caymans, the fraudulent loans that had destroyed 3 pension funds, the bribes to city officials, the lives ruined so Thaddeus Roe could add another 0 to his net worth. She'd documented all of it. Every transaction, every shell company, every victim. She'd been placed in his life 18 months ago by federal investigators who suspected he was the key to a massive financial fraud network. Her job was simple: get close, gather evidence, build an airtight case. What wasn't supposed to happen was falling in love with him. But she had, against every protocol, against every instinct, against her own better judgment. She'd looked into Thaddeus Roe's eyes and seen something worth saving, something broken that she thought she could fix, someone who was more than the sum of his crimes. She'd been wrong. The note in her hand proved that. "I can't do this. I'm sorry. Don't wait up." He'd left her on their wedding night, after taking her to bed, after whispering that he loved her, after making her believe, for just a moment, that she wasn't just a mission. She was his wife, and he'd discarded her like last season's fashion. Avery set the note down carefully on the vanity. Then she reached for her phone and dialed a number she'd hoped she'd never have to use. "It's Banks," she said, her voice flat, cold, empty of everything she'd let herself feel. "Agent Banks? We weren't expecting contact tonight. Is everything—" He left, wedding night. "There's another woman." Silence on the line. "I see. What do you want to do?" Avery looked at her reflection in the mirror. The perfect bride, the perfect trophy, the perfect fool. No, not a fool, a weapon he'd been too stupid to recognize. "Execute the warrant," she said, "all of them. I want him awake when they drag him out of whatever bed he's in." "That will burn your cover, everything you've built. I don't need cover anymore." Avery's eyes were ice. "I have everything I need. And in 6 hours, Thaddeus Roe is going to learn what happens when you underestimate the woman you married." She hung up, and Avery Banks, the bride he'd abandoned, began to plan her husband's destruction. Cold, calculated, complete. You just watched a billionaire leave his bride on their wedding night with nothing but a 12-word note. But you don't know who Avery Banks really is. You don't know why she didn't cry. You don't know what execute the warrant means, or what happens when a man who thinks he's untouchable discovers his trophy wife was never a trophy at all. Because here's the thing about underestimating people. When you dismiss someone as powerless, you give them the greatest weapon of all. Surprise. If you've ever been left by someone who didn't deserve you, if you've ever been underestimated because of how you looked or what they assumed about you, if you've ever wondered what it would feel like to destroy someone who thought you were nothing, then stay with me. Because this story is about to show you what cold revenge really looks like. And it's not about anger, it's about precision. Hit that subscribe button. You're going to want to see what happens when Thaddeus Roe wakes up tomorrow. Now, let me take you back 18 months. To the day Avery Banks became the perfect lie. Avery Banks had been 2 people for exactly 18 months. The first Avery was the one Thaddeus Roe knew. Beautiful, charming, a development coordinator at a small nonprofit, impressive enough to be interesting, modest enough not to threaten. She wore clothes just slightly above her supposed salary, had opinions just strong enough to intrigue him, and smiled just warmly enough to make him feel like the most important person in the room. She was everything Thaddeus Roe looked for in a wife: presentable, manageable, disposable. Or so he thought. The second Avery was the one nobody knew. Avery Denise Banks, Columbia Law, top of her class, master's degree in forensic accounting from NYU, 3 years at the Department of Justice, Financial Crimes Division. One of the youngest agents ever recruited into a joint FBI-DOJ task force investigating systemic fraud in the New York real estate market. Her specialty, long-term undercover infiltration. Her current assignment, Thaddeus Roe. The man had been on their radar for years. Roe Capital had grown too fast, made too much money, left too many ruined investors in its wake. But Thaddeus was careful, obsessively so. Every document was laundered through layers of shell companies. Every crime was insulated by plausible deniability. They needed someone on the inside, someone who could access his personal files, his private conversations, the truth behind the fortress of lawyers and offshore accounts. Someone he would trust completely, someone he would never suspect, someone like Avery. The meet cute had been carefully engineered. A charity gala where Thaddeus was speaking, a coincidental encounter by the bar, a conversation that felt natural because Avery had studied him for months, knew his tells, his preferences, his weaknesses. She'd played the role perfectly, too perfectly. Because somewhere in the 18 months of dinners and weekends and slow-building intimacy, something had shifted. Thaddeus Roe, underneath the ruthlessness and the cold transactions, had moments of genuine humanity. He'd told her about his father's abuse, his mother's death when he was 12, the loneliness of inheriting an empire built on cruelty. He'd looked at her one night, 3 months into their relationship, and said, "You're the first person I've met who doesn't want anything from me." The irony had nearly choked her, but the worst part of him meant it, and part of her had started to believe it. She'd reported everything to her handlers, every document, every account number, every overheard conversation. The case was building beautifully, ironclad, devastating. But she'd stopped reporting how she felt, because somewhere along the way, Avery Banks had committed the cardinal sin of undercover work. She'd fallen in love with her target. She'd seen the man behind the monster, the lonely child inside the ruthless billionaire, the possibility of redemption that probably didn't exist, but that she wanted desperately to believe in. When Thaddeus proposed, 6 months ago, at sunset on his yacht, with a ring that cost more than her real salary would ever buy, she'd said yes. Not for the mission, for him. She'd convinced herself that maybe after they were married, she could find another way, could help him come forward voluntarily, could guide him toward redemption rather than destruction. She'd been so stupid. Because tonight, their wedding night, Thaddeus had shown her who he really was. A man who could stand before God, make eternal vows, consummate a marriage, and then slip out to his mistress while his bride slept. A man who saw her as nothing more than a useful prop. A man who deserved everything that was coming for him. The love she'd felt, gone, burned away by 12 words on Plaza Hotel stationery. What remained was colder, cleaner, more dangerous, justice. And Avery Banks was very, very good at justice. At 3:47 a.m., Thaddeus Roe was in bed with Celeste Whitmore at her Upper East Side apartment when his phone started ringing. Then his second phone, then Celeste's phone. "What the hell?" Celeste muttered, reaching for her device. Thaddeus grabbed his primary phone. 17 missed calls, 23 texts, all from his lawyers, his CFO, his head of security. The first text from his attorney made his blood run cold. "FBI at Roe Capital. Warrant for your arrest. Do not come to the office. Call me immediately." Thaddeus sat up, his heart pounding. "Teddy?" Celeste asked. "What's wrong?" He didn't answer. He was already dialing. His attorney picked up on the first ring. "Where are you?" Maxwell Grant's voice was sharp with panic. "They're tearing the office apart. They have warrants for everything. Financial records, communications, personal files. Thaddeus, they have the Cayman accounts. The Cayman accounts. The ones that didn't officially exist. The ones that held the evidence of every crime he'd ever committed." "That's impossible," Thaddeus breathed. "Those accounts are buried under 17 shell companies. No one could." "Your wife gave them everything." The words didn't make sense. "What?" "Avery, your wife. She's been working with the FBI for 18 months. She's the one who gave them access. She had your passwords, your private files, your..." "Thaddeus," she recorded conversations. Dozens of them. You're on tape admitting to fraud, bribery, money laundering. Thaddeus's phone slipped from his fingers. Avery, his wife, his quiet, beautiful, unassuming wife. The woman he'd left sleeping in the bridal suite 4 hours ago. She was FBI. Everything, every conversation, every vulnerability, every secret he'd shared in the dark. She'd recorded, documented, weaponized. Thaddeus? Maxwell's voice was tinny from the phone on the bed. Thaddeus, are you there? We need to... He hung up. His hands were shaking. Celeste was staring at him, fear dawning on her face. Teddy, you're scaring me. What's happening? He didn't answer. He was thinking about the last 18 months. Every moment, every word, the way Avery had laughed at his jokes, the way she'd held him after nightmares about his father, the way she'd looked at him on their wedding day like he was everything she'd ever wanted. All of it fake, all of it performance, all of it designed to destroy him. And he'd never suspected, because he'd been too arrogant, too certain that he was the smartest person in every room. Too convinced that a woman like Avery, beautiful but powerless, sweet but simple, could never be a threat. He'd underestimated her completely, and now he was going to lose everything. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. He opened it. It was from Avery. I told you not to wait up. Now you understand why. Enjoy your mistress, Thaddeus. By morning, she'll be the only thing you have left. Your wife, Thaddeus, stared at the message. Cold, precise, devastating, just like her. At 6 a.m., federal agents knocked on Celeste Whitmore's door with a warrant for Thaddeus Roe's arrest. He was let out in handcuffs, wearing nothing but boxers and a robe, past a wall of photographers who'd been anonymously tipped about the location. The headlines wrote themselves, Billionaire groom arrested in mistress's bed hours after wedding. Roe empire crumbles, bride was undercover FBI agent. The $10 million wedding that ended in handcuffs, and Avery Banks watched it all from the bridal suite at the plaza, still wearing her wedding dress, her face betraying nothing. Cold revenge, complete. Here's what destroys me about this moment. Thaddeus Roe spent 18 months with a woman who was too good for him, and never once wondered why. He took her kindness for weakness, her patience for passivity, her presence in his life for granted. He never asked who she really was because he didn't care. She was useful, decorative, a box to check on his life achievement list. And when something better, or at least more exciting, came along, he discarded her without a second thought. He left his bride on their wedding night, after vows, after consummation, after promising forever. 12 words on hotel stationery, and he was gone. How many of you have been treated like you were disposable? How many have given everything to someone who saw you as nothing more than a convenience? Subscribe if you've ever been underestimated by someone who thought they were smarter than you, because sometimes the person they dismiss as powerless is the one holding all the cards. The case against Thaddeus Roe was airtight. Avery had documented everything. 18 months of recorded conversations, photographed documents, traced wire transfers, the shell companies, the bribed officials, the pension funds drained to fill offshore accounts, the victims numbered in the thousands, retirement savings destroyed, families ruined, dreams evaporated. All so Thaddeus Roe could add another yacht to his collection. The evidence was overwhelming. The charges were federal, and the trial was going to be the spectacle of the decade. But that wasn't enough for Avery. The day after Thaddeus's arrest, she filed for divorce, citing fraud, not just in their marriage, but in the prenuptial agreement she'd been coerced into signing without independent legal counsel. His lawyers laughed. The prenup was ironclad, they said. She'd get nothing. They stopped laughing when Avery produced recordings of Thaddeus admitting the prenup was designed to keep her trapped, and that he'd had his lawyers deliberately mislead her about its terms. Fraud, coercion, unconscionability. The prenup was voided, and under New York's equitable distribution laws, Avery, as his legal wife at the time of his arrest, was entitled to a share of every asset that wasn't seized by the federal government, which, thanks to her careful documentation of his legitimate versus illegitimate holdings, was substantial. Roe Capital's Manhattan headquarters, legitimate asset, half hers. The yacht where he'd proposed, legitimate asset, half hers. The Hamptons estate, legitimate asset, half hers. By the time the forensic accountants finished separating Thaddeus's criminal proceeds from his legitimate wealth, Avery Banks walked away with $127 million. She donated every penny, not to herself, not to some vanity foundation, to the victims. The pension funds Thaddeus had drained, the families he'd destroyed, the communities he'd hollowed out for profit. A $127 million restitution fund, administered by a victims advocacy group, distributed over 3 years to the people whose lives Thaddeus Roe had ruined. The press went insane. Betrayed bride becomes avenging angel. Avery Banks donates entire divorce settlement to Roe victims. The woman who destroyed a billionaire and then gave everything away. Avery didn't do interviews, didn't make statements, didn't gloat. She simply disappeared from public view, her revenge complete, her conscience clear, cold, clean, absolute. And Thaddeus Roe, awaiting trial in a federal detention center, watching news coverage of his ex-wife's heroism, finally understood. He hadn't married a trophy. He'd married a weapon. And he'd been too stupid to see her coming. Here's what makes Avery's revenge so devastating. It wasn't hot. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't about making Thaddeus suffer just because he'd hurt her. It was about justice. Every dollar she took from him went to the people he'd stolen from. Every headline that celebrated her victory reminded the world of his crimes. Every moment of his downfall served a purpose larger than personal vengeance. She didn't destroy him to feel better. She destroyed him because it was right. And that's the coldest revenge of all. Revenge that isn't about you at all. Revenge that transforms your pain into someone else's healing. Revenge that proves you were always better than the person who hurt you. Maybe you've been wronged by someone who thought they were untouchable. Maybe you've fantasized about revenge, hot, emotional, satisfying. But subscribe if you understand that the most powerful revenge isn't the kind that destroys your enemy. It's the kind that rebuilds what they broke, using the ashes of their empire to build something better. That's cold revenge, and it's beautiful. Thaddeus Roe's trial lasted 4 months. The evidence was overwhelming. The testimony was damning. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours. Guilty on all 47 counts. Federal conspiracy, wire fraud, money laundering, bribery, obstruction of justice. The judge sentenced him to 22 years. He'd be 62 when he got out, if he survived that long. The man who'd once commanded rooms with his presence, who'd made governors wait for his phone calls, who'd believed himself untouchable, was led away in chains to a federal penitentiary in Pennsylvania. His assets were seized. His name became synonymous with fraud. His legacy was reduced to a cautionary tale told in business school ethics classes. Everyone who'd once called him friend disappeared. The socialites, the politicians, the business partners. Even Celeste Whitmore, the woman he'd left his bride for, sold her story to a tabloid and moved to Europe with the proceeds. He was alone. Completely, utterly alone. 3 years into his sentence, Thaddeus received a visitor. He hadn't had many. His mother was dead. His father, who'd taught him everything about cruelty, had died of a stroke a year after the conviction. Some said from the shame of his son's downfall. So when the guard told him he had a visitor, Thaddeus assumed it was his lawyer with another appeal. Another desperate attempt to reduce his sentence. It wasn't his lawyer. It was Avery. She looked different, older, wearier, but still beautiful in a way that made his chest ache with regret. "Hello, Thaddeus." He stared at her through the plexiglass divider. "Why are you here?" "Because I needed to see you." She sat down, her expression unreadable. "And because you need to hear something." "What? That you won? That you destroyed me? Congratulations, mission accomplished." "No." Her voice was quiet, steady. "I came to tell you that I'm sorry." Thaddeus blinked. "What?" "I'm sorry that I fell in love with you. I'm sorry that part of what we had was real, at least for me. And I'm sorry that you'll never know if I was lying or telling the truth when I said I loved you." She paused. "I'm not sorry for what I did. You deserve to be caught. You deserve to pay for the lives you destroyed. But I am sorry that I was the one who had to do it, because despite everything, there was a version of you, a better version, that I genuinely cared about." Thaddeus felt something crack inside him, something he'd kept frozen for 3 years. "Then why?" he managed. Why are you here now? Because there's a choice in front of you, Avery said. In 7 years, you'll be eligible for parole. When that happens, you'll have 2 options. She slid a folder through the document slot. Option 1, you get out, try to rebuild your old life, and discover that no one will touch you. You'll die alone, bitter, and forgotten. Thaddeus opened the folder. Inside was a job offer from the very victims' advocacy group that had distributed the money Avery had given them. Option 2, you work with us. When you're released, you become a consultant. You help us identify financial fraud, train investigators, and prevent what happened to your victims from happening to others. He looked up at her in disbelief. You want me to work for you? I want you to become something better than what you were, Avery said. Not for me, for you, and for every person you hurt who deserves to know their suffering meant something. Thaddeus stared at the folder in his hands. Why would you offer me this? His voice was hoarse. After everything I did, to you, to those people, why would you give me a chance? Avery was silent for a long moment. Because holding on to hatred is exhausting, she finally said, and because I've spent 6 years carrying the weight of what happened between us. The lies, the love, the betrayal, yours and mine. I'm tired, Thaddeus. I'm tired of being defined by what you did to me. She leaned forward. When you left me on our wedding night, you made a choice. You chose cruelty over love. You chose selfishness over commitment. And you paid for it. Spectacularly. Then why help me now? Because revenge wasn't the point. Justice was. Her eyes met his. And justice means believing that people can change, that even the worst of us can become something better, that redemption isn't just for the people who deserve it, it's for the people brave enough to earn it. Thaddeus felt tears burning his eyes. I don't deserve this. I don't deserve anything from you. No, you don't. Avery stood. But this isn't about what you deserve. It's about who I want to be. And I don't want to be someone who watches a man drown when I could throw him a rope. She moved toward the door. The offer stands. 7 years from now, when you're eligible for parole, that folder will still be valid. You can take it or leave it. But if you take it, if you actually want to become someone worth saving, there will be a place for you. She paused at the door. Goodbye, Thaddeus. Avery. His voice stopped her. The things I said on our wedding night. Before I left. When I told you I loved you. She turned, her expression guarded. I meant them, Thaddeus said quietly. I know you'll never believe that. I know I destroyed any chance of you trusting anything I say. But I need you to know, in that moment, I meant every word. I was just too broken to live up to them. Avery studied him for a long moment. That's the tragedy, Thaddeus. I believe you did mean them. You just didn't love me enough to choose me over your worst impulses. She opened the door. Maybe in 7 years you'll learn how to choose differently. She walked out, and Thaddeus Roe sat alone in the visiting room, holding the folder that represented his only chance at redemption, understanding for the first time that the woman he'd underestimated hadn't just destroyed him. She'd offered him something he'd never given anyone, a second chance. 8 years later, Thaddeus Roe served 7 years and 4 months of his sentence. He was released on good behavior and immediately reported to the offices of the Financial Justice Coalition, the victims' advocacy group Avery had helped fund. He worked there for 12 years, trained investigators, identified fraud schemes, testified in cases that put other corrupt businessmen behind bars, helped recover over $340 million for fraud victims across the country. He never married again, never returned to the world of luxury and excess, never tried to rebuild the empire he'd lost. Instead, he lived modestly, worked tirelessly, tried every day to become someone worthy of the second chance he'd been given. He and Avery never spoke again after that prison visit, but every year, on the anniversary of their wedding, Thaddeus made an anonymous donation to the Financial Justice Coalition. Always the same amount, $10,000. The cost of the wedding he'd walked away from, divided by 1,000. 1,000 small acts of atonement for one devastating night. He didn't know if Avery ever learned about the donations, didn't know if she'd care, but he made them anyway, because she'd taught him something he'd never understood before. Love isn't about what you feel, it's about what you choose. And for the rest of his life, Thaddeus Roe chose to be worthy of the woman who destroyed him and then set him free. Avery Banks went on to become the Director of Financial Crimes Investigation at the Department of Justice. She trained a generation of agents, closed hundreds of cases, built a legacy that had nothing to do with the man she'd once married. She never talked about Thaddeus publicly, never gloated about her revenge, never let the world reduce her to the woman who destroyed a billionaire. She was more than that. She'd always been more than that. And now, finally, the world knew it too. The end. Here's what Avery's story teaches us about revenge and about grace. She had every right to hate Thaddeus Roe forever, every right to watch him rot in prison and feel satisfied, every right to walk away and never look back. Instead, she chose something harder. She chose to believe that even the people who hurt us most can become something better. She chose to offer redemption to someone who'd given her nothing but betrayal. She chose grace, not because Thaddeus deserved it, but because she refused to let his cruelty define who she became. That's not weakness. That's the greatest strength there is. Maybe someone has hurt you deeply. Maybe you're carrying anger that feels impossible to release. Maybe revenge seems like the only thing that could possibly make you feel whole again. But subscribe if you understand that the coldest revenge isn't destruction, it's transformation. It's using your pain to build something better. It's refusing to become the monster that hurt you. It's offering a second chance, not because they've earned it, but because you're strong enough to give it. Because at the end of the day, revenge doesn't heal you, but grace just might.